They said he wouldn't last a week. A single dad with nothing but a rusted toolbox and shaky past. What did he know about raising kids who weren't his? Especially not 3 of them. Not triplets. Not 6 years old. Not abandoned like yesterday's trash. But what the world counted as weakness, Daniel carried like armor. The moment he saw those 3 boys sitting on the edge of the cold metal bench outside child services, backpacks clutched like parachutes, eyes wide with fear and silence louder than any scream. He knew something in him was about to change. Before we begin this journey through scraped knees, unsaid prayers, and quiet little miracles, do us one favor. Subscribe to True Soul Stories. These tales aren't just for watching, they're for feeling, remembering, and maybe even healing. Please consider subscribing. Now let's begin. Daniel brought them home on a Tuesday. His house wasn't big. The fridge had more rust than food, and the guest room still had boxes from his last failed plan to start a business. But what it never ran out of, was patience. And for 3 boys who hadn't known much kindness, that mattered more than matching socks or fancy cereal. He learned their names first. Eli, Ezra, and Evan. 3 E's, like echoes of each other. Same crooked smiles, but different in the small ways that matter. Eli was the quiet one, always watching. Ezra talked in half sentences, like his thoughts moved faster than his mouth. And Evan cried when he thought no one was looking. But Daniel always was. The first few weeks were chaos. Milk spills, fights over crayons, nightmares, pea-soaked sheets. Ezra once locked himself in the laundry room just to scream without being punished. But Daniel didn't yell, didn't slam doors. He just sat outside the door and waited. He told them they didn't have to be brave all the time. They didn't believe him at first. Then came the night of the fever. Evan burning hot, sweat soaking the sheets. Daniel rushing him to the hospital, barefoot and broke, praying the tank wouldn't run out of gas before they reached the emergency room. And when the nurse asked, "Are you his father?" he said yes. And it felt true. The boys started calling him Dad 2 months later. Not all at once. Not in some dramatic movie moment. Just slipped out while reaching for a jacket, while asking for juice, while whispering a thank you. Spring came with small changes. Ezra started drawing again. Little stick figures of a man with 3 boys and a dog they didn't have yet. Eli began reading out loud, slow and careful. Evan stopped crying when the lights went out. They built birdhouses on Saturdays, ate pancakes for dinner on Sundays. And sometimes, when Daniel was sure they were asleep, he'd sit in the hallway with his head in his hands, torn between exhaustion and gratitude. He hadn't saved them. They were saving him. But every piece has its storm. It came wearing a gray suit and driving a black sedan. Margaret Connolly, social services oversight officer. She didn't smile. She didn't look at the boys. Just handed Daniel a clipboard and said, "There's been a petition from the stepfather. He wants them back." Daniel felt like the air got sucked out of the room. The man who abandoned them in a bus station with no coat, no explanation, now wanted them. Legally, permanently. And the system, the broken, bleeding system, was entertaining it. He called everyone he could. Old lawyer friends, a church contact, a social worker who once bought him coffee after a job interview. The answer was the same. Unless he could prove neglect or danger, the law leaned toward blood ties. Daniel didn't sleep that night. The triplets clung to him in the morning like they knew. He took them out of school early that day. Drove 2 hours to a field of sunflowers. They ran between rows like wild things, laughter echoing under the big blue sky. He watched them, so small, so full of fight, and whispered, "I'm not letting you go." The hearing was set for 2 weeks later. Margaret visited again. He's got a new job, clean record, stable home. We have to consider it. Daniel stared at her. Does he know Ezra still screams when a door slams? That Eli stops talking when strangers enter the room? That Evan, his voice cracked, that Evan once begged him not to put him in a trash bag like his stepfather joked? She didn't answer. The night before the court date, Daniel found the boys sitting on the couch, all 3 in pajamas, holding hands. "We heard you on the phone," Ezra said. Daniel didn't lie. He knelt, They might take you, but I will fight with everything I have. Eli handed him a folded paper, a drawing, for stick figures. 3 little boys, 1 tall man, all holding hands, a heart drawn over them. "We choose you," Evan whispered. The next morning, Daniel wore his best shirt, the collar still stained. He held their hands tighter than ever. The courtroom was cold. The stepfather sat across the room, smug, confident. Then came the testimony. The boys were allowed to speak, and they did. Eli went first. He tucks us in, every night. Ezra followed. He never yells, not even when I broke the window. Evan clutched his drawing. He's the only dad we got. The room fell silent. Then came the stepfather's turn. Smooth talk, big promises. "I've changed," he said. "I want my family back." But when a judge asked him to name each child's favorite food, bedtime story, or school teacher, he failed. The gavel came down. Daniel got full custody. The boys ran to him, laughing, crying. Outside, the sky broke open with rain, but none of them cared. They danced in it. Weeks later, a dog showed up on their porch. No collar, just a wagging tail and muddy paws. They named him Miracle, and that's what they became. A miracle of mess, of morning cartoons and spilled cereal, of bedtime hugs and whispered jokes. Daniel never saw it coming. But those boys, those little warriors, they weren't a detour in his life. They were the destination. And if this story stirred something in your chest, maybe it's because you believe in second chances too. Subscribe to True Soul Stories. Because the world needs more reminders that love isn't built. It's chosen. And sometimes, the people who save us don't come in capes. They come in triplets, with juice boxes, and a dog named Miracle.